This is To Catch a Con Man, Season 2, In the Victim's Voices. I will take you on another fascinating journey, but this time you will hear from other men and women that, like me, have fallen prey to the various cons, scams, and deceits by one of the most prolific and successful con artists to live and operate in the Midwest. You know him as Ricky Dugo.
Could $100,000 sustain my life? It couldn't even come close. So listen to me. If I was going to be in some sort of con, scam, conniving thing, it'd be for millions. It wouldn't be for $100,000.
To Catch a Con Man is brought to you by Studio 847 in Long Grove, Illinois. Listener discretion is advised, as some of this programming contains language and content that might be offensive to some listeners.
Join me on this adventure to catch a con man. This is Adam Albin. I am so thankful for all of the love and support I have received about this podcast, To Catch a Con Man. On the previous episode, you heard part 1 of Scott's detailed story of being victimized and conned by one of his new neighbors, a man you have come to know as Ricky Dugo. Scott had the courage to reach out to the conbyrick@gmail.com email box and has since been with me in the background, helping to get Ricky Dugo convicted. Coming up next, part 2 of Scott's amazing story.
So he's communicating to others that know me, that he knows it's me. And I'm like literally laughing. I'm like, that's fantastic, because I just shared the page. So it's one of those like, hey, heads up, this is a real thing. There's a page out here that kind of, whatever. And again, whether or not I shared it through the actual link, share this, or at the time maybe it was just a screenshot, I don't recall. But anyway, it was just one of those, like, I'm going to reinforce the message that I've been telling people already, but, why would I share a page that wasn't mine, I guess. But anyway, I heard that he was really pissed, and, basically he was going to the police and all this other stuff. And I just thought it was hilarious because, I'm in tech. I've been in IT forever. And, I knew nothing that, first of all, I didn't create it to begin with, but even if I had, there was nothing that could trace it back to me because, there was no IP or anything that was going to come my way. And also, I don't know what the law is around creating a spoof page, but, plenty of people do it. And I don't really think they're going to be too worried about, a con artist's, page getting put out there, alerting people of a scam that's, real.
Correct. Yeah, there was no way for him to trace me because I was coming through a VPN, so I could have been bouncing off of, North Korea for all he knew. But okay, keep on going. So after, you and I start communicating, I do remember you kept insanely meticulous notes. I actually have a copy of your notes that you were so nice to allow me to keep in view. And I have gone back through and looked at your Excel document. It was impressive. I'm going to tell you straight up, for $6,000, that spreadsheet definitely was worth it. It was pretty awesome to see.
Well, I did it because, by the way, I shared it with him. I literally wanted him to know how many times he changed dates, and that, if he worked for me, he would have been fired on the third date change. It had been on a performance review on the second date change, and he was on like 14 or 15 date changes. So, it was almost comical to just try to, debate with him in his own game. I knew I knew I was getting the money back. So, it was one of those take a little stress out of my life and add it to his. So I just really tried to make his life as miserable as I could, by sort of, countering all of his arguments. And my favorite, by the way, to your point, was you had said in your podcast, and we hadn't had that exchange at that point, that he changed his story and he forgot about the phones and he talked about something else.
Microwaves.
He did the same thing to me. And again, it was refrigerators. He must have had refrigerators hung in his head, because whatever it was, but it was, I'm going to get your refrigerators delivered to you. And I was like, what? Holy shit, you just acknowledged that you can't keep your own lies straight. And I think that would have been probably, a few weeks before my final cease and desist, because I was just like, all right, at this point, it's not really fun anymore, because he's not even good at it anymore. He's getting caught in his own lies. By the way, I did, your coworker was probably the last person who I found out in our neighborhood had been taken by him. We had connected at some point, just on a walk. And he was like, we'll skip ahead for a second. But the day he was arrested, he was doing heel clicks. It was fantastic. So that was fun.
Awesome. Yeah. So you reach out. Are you expecting anything back? Were you thinking I was actually going to get back to you?
I genuinely did. I thought one of two things. One, you're just Rick, and you're just trying to see who's going to come forward or whatever and identify themselves as somebody who's, trying to take them down. And the risk of that to me was zero, because he already knew who I was. So I was like, this is fine if he knows I'm, happy to help. And then the other side was it wasn't going to go anywhere. So, I felt like there's only upside if somebody was really out there trying to, do the right thing, and I could help in any small way. I didn't want to. We'll save this point for a minute, but I didn't want to get too involved, because I'd already let it go. And one of my things is, we all kind of have negative experiences in our lives, and we all treat them different ways, and some you can't let go of, and there's been plenty of those that, I still hang on to, like anybody who, is a human being and occasionally has a mental health challenge. This was one where I was like, it's just not enough for me to stay up at night about. But if I can, spend a little bit of time and it's important to somebody else, let's do it. And so, fast forward, we would go meet for coffee. Yeah,
we went to a Starbucks. It was a hot Sunday. It was in June. I want to say it was about June 3rd, maybe. I have it all written down. And I remember we met at about 2:30, 3 o'clock or thereabouts. It was towards the early afternoon. I remember what I ordered: 6-shot all ice Americano, no water. Basically, 6 shots of espresso. And it was funny because I didn't know you. I had never met you, but I felt like I knew you just in the first couple minutes of sitting down with you. So, first impressions, at least for me, were I like this guy. He brought great notes. He's got, a spreadsheet. You and I did have a mutual connection. We actually probably had more than one or two. So I definitely felt like we had the opportunity to kind of vet each other. So you go to the meeting, and then and you gave me probably the best piece of advice anybody has given me this whole time. And it was, Adam, don't let this get the best of you. Make this a hobby. Don't let him consume you. Make this a hobby. And I still use that phrase today. When I tell people that life goes on, if you want to do something, make it a hobby. Don't obsess over it. And I hope that people do not think I obsess over this. I absolutely do not obsess over this.
You certainly were very passionate.
Passionate, yes, correct.
Yeah, without sharing my own personal experience, I had an experience that paralleled kind of where I saw you at that time. And, it was something that I felt like I got, too obsessed over for a period of time. You want to right the wrongs, you want to do certain things. And, at some point I found in my situation, which was very different, that I had to just eventually come to terms and let things go. And I was worried that this could be something that could consume you. And I remember just thinking to myself, man, if you could do this, like I said, as a hobby and some good could come of it, best case scenario, you just make more people aware. And that's a few less people that could, be hurt by them. It never occurred to me for a second that you'd see it through as far as you did. And I remember, when because everybody kind of knows how the story ends, that, like, holy shit, like, he got him. Because there's no chance, and we can talk about that at the end of this, but there's no chance that he was ever getting caught. There's one of these things with the way the laws are written, and to your point on jurisdictions and all this stuff, so it can't even be cumulative because it's all individual spot crimes. Like, I in my head, I was like, maybe you managed to get, something on the record, where at least the police are aware of it. That was the best case scenario. I mean, I really thought, like, hey, shit, maybe even gets arrested, for, a 4-hour period of time in Vernon Hills, and, they process him and he's back out the door. I really thought that was the best we could hope for.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate that. But what happened, Scott, was that spoof page traveled further and farther and wider than I ever knew. Because by the end of that spoof page being up, within like 6 days, I had accumulated 17 different victims. And some of those victims, they may have been some of your neighbors, but some of them did not want to cooperate. They did not want to be involved. And I kind of want to touch on that as well, because you do have neighbors, or you had some old neighbors in that neighborhood that were victims that did not want to cooperate. Eventually, they didn't want to be involved. And do you think that was because of their status, in the district?
There's a lot of reasons. I think we could all speculate, right? So, yes, are absolutely involved with or connected, school boards or, various factors. Maybe they thought there could be a conflict of interest. For many, I'm sure it's just, plain old embarrassment. It's not fun to, acknowledge that you were taken on, like I said, in hindsight, what really looks like a pretty stupid thing. Like, you do feel foolish. And it's a little embarrassing because, we're like, I've met you. I know you're not a stupid person. I've other neighbors, these people are smart. They make a good living. So it is embarrassing when you're, a well-established professional out there who should know better. And you have to acknowledge it in an open space that you didn't. That wasn't easy to do. But I think, once you sort of came to terms with the fact that that's the worst thing that was going to happen, was a little bit of embarrassment. And the other side of it is, letting people know and potentially, like I said, preventing one person from getting scammed is a good thing. I wouldn't find out until all the work you did how much damage this guy actually had done and the lives he devastated. Because, for what he did to you and I, it was, I'm not going to say insignificant, but it did not transform our lives in any meaningful way from a financial perspective. It hurt, it stung, it was way more about the morality of it, the violation of trust, all of the other things that went with it. I know for me, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm guessing similarly for you at some point, where it was just, this is not okay. And, somebody who tries to, and none of us do it as much as we'd like, but tries to give back, in various ways and through philanthropy and other stuff. Like, I've been sort of taken advantage of and sort of global volunteer situations where you're trying to help somebody or sponsor somebody in a developing country, and you find out later it's not really going where it's supposed to, because you kind of know there's the risk associated with it, and then you're just like, okay, so I'm not going to throw good money after bad. This was so different to me. This was up close, personal, shake hands with my wife, hug my wife at a flamingo. Like this, that's where the violation came in. Like, don't have our families connect and then think it's okay to, consider that person a target.
I find it to be wild. The sociopathic nature of this man and how he lacks all feeling and empathy, and he could
it's the lack of empathy that's just overwhelming.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about at our Starbucks meeting. You and I kind of talked about, where we wanted to go next, because I didn't have a whole lot of buy-in at that time. You were the first, you were the second in-person guy that I had met outside of my coworker. But my coworker was, he was pretty hesitant about really wanting to do anything at the start. I really had to push him in a certain direction, and eventually he was on board. But you were the first one that was really on board and made a commitment to me to be able. You're like, sure, man, I'll do whatever you need. I'm there, and it meant a lot. And it actually gave me the balls to actually later that day, I ended up going to Vernon Hills and filing the police report. I don't think we've ever talked. I remember you had something going on that night, and I felt the need to go like right then and there. I felt like we had established something. We had some momentum. I think you had dinner plans with your family.
Yeah, we were. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember it being a tight window. And I honestly, I thought when I left my house, I'm like, I'm going to go and just hand all this material over to somebody. And it's probably going to, kind of like a dealer at the table, you clap your hands and you walk away. I really wasn't expecting there to be anything beyond that. So I will say you're obviously a good salesman in the sense, because you did ask, if I would be willing to talk to a detective and others. I just wasn't in a position to do it that day. So, and frankly, I wasn't even thinking about it when I was driving to that Starbucks. I was thinking, like I said, I was going to give you as much material as I could and kind of arm you. And then I felt like my job had already been done because, like I said, I'd been trying to get the word out for so long. And I was just sort of, it was behind me. I was moving on. So it was a little surprising to me when I was like, yeah, I guess I'll talk to a detective if he calls.
We were talking about Starbucks and how you thought that your job was done. Your job was not done, Scott. Tell me about what happened next.
So, again, at the time, you didn't know what was going to happen next either, because you were just going to the police station. So
for sure.
It was, we kept in touch via text, you and I, but there was some time that passed. Because I did talk to, I'm not going to name names, because even if I do, I'll probably get them wrong. But I did talk to, I think the only person I ever really spoke to, I don't think it was Vernon Hills. I think it was Lake County. And so I bet it was a month or two, right, before I actually would end up getting a call from anybody. And then what was interesting was I didn't get a call at first. Talk about intimidating. It was like a Lake County investigator. I don't know the title.
Yeah.
And then the detective.
Detective Bill Bang.
Go ahead.
It was Detective Bill Bang.
Okay. And then there was a Tony Thies involved. Is that right? Am I getting a name right there, or is that wrong?
Yeah, that's correct. Tony would have come. You must have been in the fall. Tony was there. The first time I met Tony was at the Over Here, which is the Wire. That's August 21st. And that's like the first time he was involved in the case. So, yeah, you're probably in that late summer.
I think he was the guy. I don't think it was Bill. I think it was Tony, because I remember I still have his card. Because I remember, like, when we were preparing for the trial and everything, I wanted to make sure I had all my ducks in a row. So his card kind of stuck out. I just kind of stapled it to a file. But anyway, irrespective of who it was a little intimidating. Like, two people just show up at your door and, introduce themselves. And I didn't even make a connection to Rick Dugo at that point. I'm like, oh my God, like a kid was kidnapped, something, my car was associated with a crime, or like, who knows? Everything starts going through your head. And I got a crystal clean record. I mean, so that was my first instinct. Anyway, so they came in and we spoke for a bit. And then they asked me if I'd come in and give like kind of an official, account of whatever it was. And then we ended up figuring it all out, and they ended up getting, my statement. But it took a while. And I remember, in your podcast, you talked about how slowly things turned. That was my first experience in seeing how slowly things turned, because I gave a statement and it was radio silence, like forever. Like, I heard from you a few times. I never heard anything from them. And again, I didn't really have a horse in the race, because they kind of kept saying that the way this was going, anything that I might be involved with, like the statute of limitations, would run out. They're pretty transparent about it. I will give them credit for never kind of creating a false expectation. But I was shocked at how long things took. I mean, each time I would be in touch with them again, it was like I had forgotten about it all over again. Like, again, I'd moved on. I forgot that this thing was even, I just thought maybe the case was dropped.
Yeah, I mean, the Perfect Storm is one.
You were in touch with them for various reasons. I was just sort of like a support witness.
Yeah.
So there was really no obligation to keep me in the loop.
No, but there were 3, 4, 5, 6 months, swaths of time that happened where it was radio silence. Did they download your phone?
Pre-COVID, by the way.
Yeah, this is all pre-COVID. Yeah, this is all pre-COVID.
Silence was not because the government shut down. It was just silence.
Yeah. When you went into Lake County and you gave your statement, did they download your phone?
No, because I had already done it. They had asked me if I could, and I was like, because I had Tony's email. And I was like, did you check your email? Because I already sent you everything. And I just had software that could pull, individual text threads out of a phone. And so I asked him, like, if timestamps there, if you need to authenticate it in any way. I've got the backup of my phone if you want the backup to just, show that this is not, anything manipulated in any way, the text or the raw text. And, they were able to verify the file and that it was, exact and untouched, and it was good enough for them.
Great. All right, so there's radio silence, and that's basically 2018 to 2019. So it's always bothered me that when Rick is finally charged, and again, he's actually charged in 2021. Your case and the neighbors that also wanted to participate, those statutes of limitations had run out. So when you see charges, but you don't see that, like, your case or any, all the stuff that you've done in the background, did that hurt you? I mean, it seems like, you kind of thought maybe it wasn't going to happen, but didn't it, like, bother you? That, like,
it did.
Yeah.
It did. No, 100%. Because actually, I didn't know for certain, because nobody gave me the dates. They said statutes were running out. I don't think I knew for sure until Kevin Barrow reached out and asked if I was willing to testify. And at that point, I was like, well, absolutely. But I thought I was going to be testifying on behalf of myself, kind of thing. And he was like, hey, heads up, you're not actually involved here. You're just going to be part of helping demonstrate the pattern. I'm like, wait. I was involved. And then that's when he informed me of the statute of limitations had run up. And I was like, really? So it did bother me. It didn't create any pause for a second, because I was like, you know what, at this point, it didn't matter. Like, if we could get him, I just wanted him, I wanted to provide any support that could be provided, because at this point, if you had taken it this far, like, I could show up for an hour or two and try to, help establish that pattern. Because I felt like at that point, the way Kevin had described it was essential that, and we didn't know at the time, by the way, that it was going to be a bench trial. I just remember he was still putting the case together, and, the logistics hadn't all been worked out. There were multiple cases involved, but that I could, help establish that he had been running the similar con, and that the text thread paralleled so eerily familiar to other stories that it was going to potentially help establish that pattern. Once I heard that, I was like, done,
Yeah.
Just let me know where I need to be.
So
I'm happy to do it.
So, you brought something up about 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, and we are going to touch on that. You were one of the other act witnesses You are one of the few that got to literally sit in front of Ricky Dugo and tell a story. And I know how that made me feel. I think I would have felt the same if it wasn't the state versus Ricky Dugo, like pertaining to my case, if it was to do that for somebody else. I'm so thankful that you were. But the importance of that motion, again, that's the other acts motion that Kevin Barrow filed, and that motion was so key. The whole case hinged on that, because if we didn't have the ability to bring in other witnesses, other people that would testify under oath, victims that would testify under oath, that these were the identical crimes, this is the identical pitch, these are the identical texts, this is a rinse and repeat crime here. It was so instrumental in getting that motion approved by the judge. Without that, I don't know if we would be talking right now. So I'm thankful.
As you know, I don't live in Illinois anymore, but if I did, and Kevin ran for office, I don't care what party he ran for. I don't care if I was with that party or not. I would vote for that guy. And I know that there were gaps and there were things that could have been done better by the county as a whole. But I have the utmost respect for him. And I would just want, if there's a voice and there's an audience, I would want people to know. I mean, I think he was brilliant in his strategy. And also, by the way, incredible, just what nobody likes being called a victim, but an incredible victim advocate in the sense of just helping you prepare without, changing your story in any way whatsoever. He literally just helped you understand what the system was going to do. Here's how it works. We have to do all this logistics stuff. We have to be able to describe, the sort of chain of evidence of this text thread and all this other, just legal jargon. But at the end of the day, it was still just a way to facilitate telling your story without sort of violating the rules of testimony. I thought he and I think Russell was the other. Was it Russ?
Yeah, Russell Caskey. I call him young Russell Caskey. Yeah.
Yes. I thought both of them did a brilliant job. I really was very impressed.
I absolutely echo that same sentiment. I thought they both were amazing. Especially, you're right, you said it brilliantly, advocates for justice, advocates for victims and people that may not have ever testified before. So I'm with you. I believe firmly that they are the stars of this show. I think Lake County had some missteps along the way early on. It wasn't due to the investigators. It wasn't due to the eventual prosecutors. There was just a string of events and things that happened that just fell out of favor to the victims that were out there. The victims like you that had their statutes of limitations expire. I've always struggled with that, Scott, because we would have had, if this would have been charged in 2018, 2019, even 2020, early 2020, we would have had, with your neighbors and the people that I had, 20 to 30 total charges. So it would have made a big difference, the burden for him to prove innocence when you have 17 people, or let's just call it 8 or 9 people with cases, would have been that much harder for him to wiggle out of. So it's.
By the way, I'm looking forward to when we get to the trial part, because that was probably my favorite part of my experience anyway. So
yeah,
we'll get to that when we get to it.
Yeah. So I mean, no, and
exactly right.
I think
that would have been nice to have more people be a part of it, because you did feel the weight of the responsibility of the testimony, because I knew that there were only 3 other act witnesses, and so it was relatively small subset, but a significant, very small subset of the people that he had done damage to.
Right. So let's talk about that. It's a perfect segue. Let's talk about the trial. Cat's out of the bag. Scott's one of the other act witnesses. Talk to me about the trial. You go through some prep with Kevin and Russell.
Well, so first of all, I got to talk about the day I was supposed to testify, because this is funny, right? So you had brought it up in your podcast. They brought it up to me as part of the instructions, but it was you do not interact with anybody when you walk in and out of that courtroom. It's just a straight up, whatever. So I'm told to go on, I think it was February 2nd. I It doesn't matter. By the way, I was given the same dates as you as all the other ones where I was supposed to show up in, early December, and then that got pushed. And so I was involved in all the same postponements, obviously, as you were. But what was interesting was I was told to come to court, the day that you were testifying. And at some point there was a brief recess, and you walked out. You just felt stoic as hell. And I feel like we exchanged glances for a second. And I knew, like, okay, we can't talk to each other. So anyway, then you went back in the courtroom, and it was like an hour and a half later. Who's not Kevin or Russ? There was a woman who was kind of helping sort of keep us all in check and organize.
The victim's advocate, Melissa Burke. She was fantastic.
Melissa was amazing. So, like, just super, engaging and very understanding about delays and everything else. So she comes out and she's like, listen, we didn't plan for this, but the cross-examination with Adam has taken a long time. And all I could think was, oh, that sucks. Like, hey, I got to drive home and I got to come back again tomorrow. But I got to tell you, there was a big part of me that's like, wow, that's just brutal. Like, seriously, like, how long can this guy be on the stand, and what can they possibly be challenging him with? Like, anyway,
I appreciate.
I felt like I got a pretty good perspective from the podcast, but it's crazy. What did they have you in cross-exam for, like, a half a day?
No, cross-examination was about an hour and a half, but it was like nonstop. It was barrages of, I mean, you were there. I don't want to say the attorney's name. I call him the big bad attorney from the city. You know what he did to you. And I know that you deflected. You probably deflected a lot of it better than I did.
Well, I didn't have as much to talk about, right? Remember, you were the center of the case. So I had a much easier job than you, but by a lot, for a lot of different reasons. But they did block, like 2 hours for my cross-exam, which I remember thinking, and I thought at the time you were up there for 4, so I didn't realize that, but I was like, oh my God, 2 hours. Like, my whole prosecutorial story was like 90 minutes, which, as you know, is just this long, arduous walk through every detail and every single thing. So, I figured the cross-exam should be, a lot shorter. Anyway, they booked an hour and a half for it. So fortunately, we didn't need anywhere near that. But that was based on what I was expecting a nightmare scenario.
So,
I did not have. But real quick, if you've ever seen the SNL where Kate McKinnon is, like, taken up into space, and then there's the other folks around her, and they all have a very different experience because she gets, like, anally probed and all these other things, and everybody else is like, no, I went to heaven and it was bliss. I went to heaven and it was bliss, and you got the anal probe.
Thank you. No, thank you.
It's a great SNL if you've never seen it.
I will absolutely watch it as soon as we're done.
Okay.
Yeah, it was.
Understand the parallel.
Yeah, there's no doubt. It was rough. But let's talk about, you're obviously, Russell and Kevin have prepared you well. They've given you the framework for what they believe, the burden of the state is. They're preparing you. Obviously, you're going to go in, you're going to testify, you're going to tell the truth. How did it go? I mean, like, they start out and they're asking you the similar questions, I take it, like, tell us about how you know Ricky Dugo, what do you do for a living, all of these things, right?
They get the basic ones down first, but you could tell there's 2 main objectives he had. One was, why didn't I go to the police? And that was so simple, right? I mean, I think he felt like there was going to be more to that than it was. But, from my perspective, and it's almost, my text thread explained it almost for me. So it was just easy for me to reinforce that, hey, this was just a local guy who was committing, from what I had thought at the time was basically petty theft. I didn't know what the story had built to. And so that's exactly what I said, which I think some of it was objected to because of hearsay or whatever. But, I said what I knew at the time was it was, a few $1,000s or, a little more than that. But it wasn't, this grand scheme. And so I never went, to the police because it didn't seem like it would have gone anywhere. And I had experience with identity fraud and other things, and nobody ever, does anything. And so he then was, ready to pounce on, well, it wasn't until Adam reached out to you, isn't that right, when you were willing to, have a conversation with the police? And I was like, yeah, Absolutely. Because at that point, I understood there was a pattern going on and that I wasn't the only one involved. So I think he was hoping that, like, you had somehow sold me on going to the police to make the story bigger than it was. But it allowed me to say that we spoke about it being the exact same plan a year apart. So I don't think that went well for him.
Yeah.
Because really it just reinforced the pattern, which was the whole reason I was there to begin with. And he sort of shut that line of questioning down pretty quickly because, like I said, I think it helped the prosecution way more than it helped him. And then the second thing, and I think he really thought he was going to be able to discredit me on this, and it was kind of a Hail Mary on his part, was he was like, did your wife know about the investment? I'm like, actually, she did. He's like, well, at this point in your testimony, you said that you told Rick that your wife had found out money was missing, which was exact exchange I had with Rick in text. And he thought, he was going to catch me in this big lie. I'm like, well, my wife's not here, so she can't testify, to this, but we had made the decision together, but Rick didn't know that. We were told never to talk to anybody about it because Rick said it would put the deal in jeopardy. So I used that as a lever to put pressure on him because my wife knew his wife.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so that more or less ended it. Like, they had booked me for an hour and a half. I was up and down in like 14 minutes.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Lucky you.
Like I said, he had two angles to go for. One stung him because it just reinforced the pattern. And the other was like, well, shit, I guess that does make sense, right? Like, why?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you use it as a lever?
And it's funny because you and I had a conversation, I think the day that he actually was found guilty. And you had said, I'm so glad, he tried to he got me up there and he tried to come after me. He's like, but I was awesome and I deflected. And you said something like that. I mean, I'm paraphrasing totally, but I remember how proud you were.
Bigger than it was because at the time I was so amped and adrenalized that I was like, man, this guy is this big high powered attorney and he got nothing. Yeah. But the other thing that I thought was funny, because, you were right. Like you said, it's nothing like the movies, and it's really slow and arduous. The one point that was like the movies, though, where he was like, well, isn't it true that the only reason you went to the police is because Adam, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I was just so, monotone. Yeah. Like, just this big, huge buildup. Like, I'm supposed to get a reaction out of it. And I'm like, that's exactly why I went to the police, because I knew somebody else had gone to the police.
I found some of his courtroom theatrics to be so wild and extreme. At one point, I looked at Judge Lombardo out, and I'm like, can you help me out here? He's, notes! You have notes! Your Honor, and he's screaming, like, and he's looking around to see who's watching him. I found him.
Nobody in the courtroom.
Right. Like, it's Dorothy Tucker. Like, that's it. So, it's pretty wild. I'm so thankful that you took the time, that you had the guts, the gall to be another act victim. I don't know if they gave you a choice or not, but no,
they did, 100%. It was. I mean, those are voluntary. I guess they can subpoena you for it, but I don't know that anybody was subpoenaed. I think most people probably just said, yeah, sure. I do wish that I would have gone the next day, though, because, like, when I found out that bond was revoked and that, they just, put the hammer down right there and he got cuffed and walked out, I was like, man, that would have just been so great to see. And then for the sentencing, I got to see the pictures, like, you described it. I mean, if somebody didn't have like the name underneath that photo, I would have been like, well, when is the Rick Dugo one showing up? He was a transformationally different person, the gray hair. He looked like he aged 10 years. He just looked so defeated. And not that you wish anybody bad. Like, I didn't necessarily, like, first of all, he's a father, right? I don't want that for his kids. There's so many things I didn't, want. But at the end of the day, this guy's got to be taken off the streets. He's got to be taken out of circulation. So there was a level of satisfaction there, but, it feels wrong to sort of wallow in somebody knowing that their freedom is gone. But if anybody deserved it, it was him.
I'm wallowing in it. I feel fantastic. And seeing him defeated, I know this probably sounds wrong, but it makes me feel better because
Well, you also put in a lot of work.
Well, but
so that was the reward.
Right? Yeah,
put in a lot of work.
Yeah, but so did you. I mean, everybody that has been involved, whether it's in the background, silent, or we have confidants, we have spotters, we have people within the community paying attention, and you had all these victims. But really, there's only a few of us that actually got up there and faced them. So I just want to touch on something really quickly and go back to your time on the stand, as you're sitting there and you're being asked these questions. Did you look at Rick at that time?
Well, you got to remember, I was asked to identify him, so I'm sure you were too.
Yeah.
And it was, hey, can you identify an article of clothing? And the confidence in which Rick opened his coat to make it clear, his shirt and the color of his tie. He looked right at me, and I was like, yeah, he's sitting right over there, whatever, light blue shirt, purple tie, whatever it was. I don't recall exactly. It was just like the arrogance was still there. Like on that day, the day before his bond would be revoked, that air was still in the balloon, man. Like it was full. Like there wasn't anything about him that looked scared or threatened or, he did not know what was coming 24 hours later. Zero chance.
Yeah, I don't think any of us really. Normally there's a pause. Normally a judge takes a couple days to come up with a decision. Surely he had no idea, but it was always the Rick Dugo that was going to beat the case. It was always the Rick Dugo that would never be arrested. Always the Rick Dugo that this is a lie and that's why I have attorneys. And
at a minimum, there would be days, right? Days of freedom. He thought he was going to be going home that next day, no matter what, for some period of days. I think those days that were taken away were sweeter than the 4 years or the 3 and change that he'll have to spend in prison. The fact that he genuinely thought, he was going to get to go home and at least kind of, hug his wife and kids or whatever, and then that was taken away. That's where I'll wallow it. Because he needed to feel a gutting defeat, and that was sweet.
He absolutely felt defeated. He was gutted. He was shaking. And, I also, Scott, think it's interesting. I mean, there was nobody for his side in the courtroom. I mean, didn't that kind of stand out to you as being odd? Guys, he's facing the first of many felony trials. His sister isn't there. His wife isn't there. And there's nobody in his corner,
It's lonely when you do that kind of stuff to people. It didn't strike me because I genuinely didn't expect anybody to be there. I felt like this is a guy who made a living on burning bridges, and it had to have a very adverse impact on his family. And I just, I didn't know what you necessarily knew about the relationship with his sister and others. My gut instinct was there was not going to be anybody in that courtroom because it was just such a damning. First of all, it was the first of 3 cases. So even if he somehow got off the one, he'd have to face 2 more. Which that whole severing theory, again, if this was the best defense attorney around, he sure seemed to make a lot of mistakes.
I thought the same with having a bench trial versus a jury trial. He's slick Rick. I mean, he could easily have these jurors be enamored by his looks, his size, his blue eyes. I'm not trying to make him seem like he's a legend, but I mean, he enamored all of us. I mean, at least the people, a lot of the victims that I've talked to, they all found something in him that was a certain sort of magnetism,
Listen, at least at a first impression,
yeah.
If you obviously once you got to know him a little bit, that quickly turned the other way in a hurry. But to your point, on a first impression, which a jury, they only got to see him for a few days. Yeah. I agree. That could have played in his favor. And
so you thought severing the cases was a mistake as well?
Absolutely it was. Now you got to take 3 swings? I just didn't understand. Again, it's easy for me to say Monday morning quarterback. And it obviously worked out the way we wanted it to. But, I mean, now you got to win 3 times. I just didn't understand that. But maybe the idea was if we string this out long enough, the judge is going to just say this is nuts. It's clogging up the docket. We're going to just look for an aggressive plea deal. And maybe the hope was that he'd get off on probation.
Yeah, it was
That's the only thing I can think of.
And it was potentially 4 trials because you had the last one. I don't want to say names, but there was the last trial. I call him Lou in the podcast. His trial would have probably come up second. There was a couple of the trials. I don't think the evidence was as strong, or they maybe had some reservations about some things, but definitely I thought it was a mistake on both of those, the severing as well as bench versus jury. I thought both of those were mistakes. And I'm with you. I can't understand why any defense attorney would guide them that way or guide Rick that way. But, again, to our advantage, we had other acts motion approved. We had the severing of cases, which was their idea, the defenses, as well as a bench trial. It just worked out, So let's just finish up with let's talk about when you find out that he's remanded. Let's go back into that piece. You find out he's been remanded. You find out he's in jail. How do you feel?
I mean, honestly, it was great. More than anything, it was getting to see the Dorothy Tucker story that you helped, get put together. And I don't want to name the names, but the person who lost like $600,000, I just kept thinking, and there were many more, right? So many more people. And then people who were never even probably naming the podcast. And I just kept thinking, what a sense of satisfaction they must have. Like, they will not get back what was taken away, but this has to give them some sense of solace and relief that this guy finally, didn't get away with it. Like I said, I don't take pride in seeing somebody's misfortune. It's just never, but to know that it was the end of that sort of systemic pattern of ruining people's lives. My view was this guy has to be taken out of circulation. And so even when he gets out, which is going to be sooner than it should be because he really should never be out, there's going to be so many eyes on him. And, it's going to be so much more difficult for him to get away with. Like, maybe he moves to Alaska and he thinks he can, find a fresh crop, to go after. But, I mean, his life is going to be fundamentally changed, and he is going to be a very old man from what prison's going to do to him perspective. We saw what 30 days did to him. I can't imagine what 3 years is going to do to him. So, I do feel, a sense of satisfaction that his ways of ruining people's lives should be over.
It's really well said. Is there anything that I didn't touch on? Anything you want to say?
There's one last thing I got to say, just because I feel like you sell yourself short on this. I was involved in a startup company. I've been in leadership positions in different companies, and you're selling yourself way short. I know how difficult it is to start something from zero. And I've had my share of experiences trying to start something from zero and saying, this is too much, and I'm not going to, throw any further effort at this. It's just not worth it. You never did that. Like, you just kept saying it. And so I don't know that you really did it as a hobby, man. I think you took it with a sense of passion and purpose, and you saw it through despite tons of headwinds coming at you. So, I think myself and others probably would have just looked at that and said, if I can't do this small thing, like go sit in a witness chair for a couple hours after all the work you put in, I mean, that doesn't say a lot about us if we weren't willing to do that. So I will just say, don't sell yourself short. What you did was incredible. And, I'll just be very direct. Like, I didn't have a whole lot of interest in the story or the case or any of it. I just wanted to let it go. And, you kept it alive, and I sort of followed it from afar because I wanted to see you succeed. And even when the podcast came out, I'm like, I already know this story. Like, maybe I'll listen to it, maybe I won't. And then, I started listening to it. I'm like, fuck, man, this guy really went after it. I don't know. So I thought it was really not just about a true crime podcast or about the story, but about like what somebody can do if they really set their mind to it. I hope it didn't take too big of a strain on you mentally. I know you talked about some of the periods where, you weren't eating, and, I think we all can identify with, darkness and when things get rough and it's hard to kind of see the other side of it. But if nothing else, if there's a positive lesson to be taken out of it is, if you're going through hell, keep on going. And I kind of feel like that's exactly what you did, and just said, fuck it, I'm not going to lose. And I love that. So I thought it was an incredible, just sort of personal saga. I think of it more as your story than I do Rick's story, because fuck him, why should he get any more recognition other than just being known for, not being somebody to get involved with. But yeah, nothing but props. I say that with sincerity.
You've left me speechless. I really appreciate that. It's definitely a weird. It's weird to be sitting in my chair today because I'm on the other end of it, and I think a lot of people that do reach out that have been fond of the podcast and the story that all of us cumulatively have been able to tell is that I'm on the other end of it now. This is a victory lap for all of us. And it's more of that. I think what you said, I really liked, it's a story of personal perseverance and not giving up. I made promises to my kids, Scott. I told them I would not stop until justice was served. I was going to right the wrong and make sure that I saw this through. I wasn't going to give up, and you're right. There were a lot of things that happened along the way, but, we have the power, to overcome objections. We have the power to overcome roadblocks and stumbles, and there were a lot of stumbles. But cumulatively as a group, we all came together. You've got victims, you've got detectives and prosecutors and, law enforcement, and these just so many different people that helped. And, this literally did take a village to take this man down. This is not a me story. Like this is everybody's story, because there were so many different people that lended help and assistance along the way. So, you've got to...
You tell it your way, I'll tell it my
way.
You get more ears because you got a podcast.
Yeah, I'll agree to disagree. I love what you said. You kind of brought me to tears. It's been an interesting 5 years, but I'm going to tell you this straight up. Meeting you at Starbucks that day, you confided in me with everything you had accomplished and the things that you were doing in the background. You've always been supportive. I'm super thankful. I hope that you always know that you have a friend in me, somebody that's reliable, somebody that will always keep you and your name safe. Because that's what we had. I didn't have to talk to you every couple months. I didn't have to talk to you every 6 months, maybe once a year, but. I think we'll always share a commonality that we were some of the few that got to face him and take him down. So I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Well, pleasure's been mine. Thanks for all you've done.
thank you for listening in to In the Victim's Voices. We just wrapped up Scott's two-part story of being conned by Ricky Dugo. Scott is called to the witness stand and provides his detailed account in the case of the state of Illinois versus Ricky Dugo. I am forever grateful that Scott had the courage to not only reach out to me in the summer of 2018, but also for standing up for all of the victims as he recounted his nightmare as one of the other act witnesses and testified against Ricky Dugo. On the next episode of To Catch a Con Man, we will head to the Lake of the Ozarks, where Ricky Dugo loved to spend the summers, showing off his 46-foot offshore cigarette boat and scamming victims down there for over $2 million. You will meet a guy that was introduced to me as someone I should contact just before I went into Lake County and provided them with my detailed Dugo file.